皆さん、こんにちは。僕はミスタースーです。今日のビデオは
逆関数です。
一緒に始めましょうよ。Alright, so inverse functions. First thing we should kind of figure out is, well, what is an inverse anyway? So the word inverse basically just means reverse operation. So a lot of time you'll hear people say the word opposite instead, which is not exactly correct. So opposite, don't use that. Not when you're talking about inverses. This is called wrong. Unless it's adding, subtracting, then in that case, it's the inverse. Because opposite, what that really means in math is just negative / positive. So if you're looking at the negative of something, it's the opposite. If you're looking at the inverse, it's the reverse operation. So, or you can say operator too. Operation, operator, same thing. All right, so for functions and inverse functions, let's kind of look at what they mean. Quick little side note, like literal side note. This notation means f inverse. So that function itself is the inverse function of x, of f of x. Okay, so a function will take an x and then give you y. An inverse function, or f of x, an inverse function does something a little bit different. An inverse function is going to take in that y value, and then what it will give you in the end is the x value that made that happen. Alright, what does this mean then? It means that I'm going to use this notation over here. If you have f, it takes an x, performs operations on it. So keyword is the operations. So that's what functions do. They perform operations on numbers. And then you're going to get a y. And, oh, whoops. Photoshop is weird sometimes. So if you put in y, then you'll get a x. That's what happens with an inverse function. So look at these inputs and outputs. All right, determining inverses. So function compositions, you need to watch that video or understand function compositions / know the notation before this. Otherwise, this will not make any sense. That notation, again, just go and watch the function compositions video or review it on the internet or somehow get it so that you will know what this means. Or else you'll be sad and confused. Anyway, they are called inverses if that is true. So, if we just calculate that out, we'll just put g into x, and yeah, it's going to look a bit weird for right now. And then this is what we get. The square and square root cancel out. We can divide out the 3, and then we get x minus 1 minus 1, which is x minus 2. All right, so what happens here? Oh, by the way, just a quick thing. That's not 0. Negative 1 minus 1 is not 0. That's negative 2. You start at negative 1, go over minus 1, and that's what you get. All right, x minus 2. We don't need to check any further because this already fails the definition. They are not inverses because that did not equal x. And if it did, we would still have to check a little bit further. All right, so let's look at yet another example. So this looks very similar, but it's a little bit different. So let's just check it, see what happens. 3 times, and then put that little square root thing in there. And then we are going to square that, minus 1. Square root and square will cancel each other out because they're inverses of each other. And then we divide that 3 into 3. We get x plus 1 minus 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. This is the positive 1 minus 1. So we get x. Question, inverses? Not sure yet. We have to check the other way as well. Because remember, in the definition, there's this word. This word is and. And means that both have to be true. Otherwise, we can't conclude anything. So let's try that. Going the other way, g of f of x. So that means we're putting f of x into that square root thingy. Got 3x squared minus 1 plus 1 all divided by 3 square rooted. All right, we can see that the negative 1 and 1 will subtract. And then we have square root of 3x squared over 3. The 3 and the 3 will divide, and then we just get what's left is the square root of x. And yeah, so by the way, quick thing, don't do that. That is wrong / sad. So I'm going to erase the sadness. All right, run that 3 back in. All right, so we had x squared, square rooted. So then what we have here is square root and square will cancel out because they're inverses, and we get x left. So this equals x both ways. Therefore, these are inverses. Okay, so finding an inverse is interesting. So the first thing is we need to find what one-to-one means. A function is called one-to-one if each output corresponds to one input. So what does that mean? That means that every y value in a function, so if you look at the domain and the range, every y matches with exactly 1x. So there's a good reason for that, because one-to-one functions are the only ones that can have inverses. So the reason for that is because, well, let's kind of look at the little function machine up there. So for an inverse, we're putting in a y and getting an x out. So that means if we have two y's that share an x, sorry, if we have two x's that share a y, so let me just correct that real fast. If two x's share a y, then weirdness happens, because basically we have this split x coming out. So we need to figure out, well, which x is it? So we need to be able to have that clarity, therefore one-to-one is necessary. Horizontal line test is a good way to actually look at that. So if we look at two different types of functions, like this one, put a horizontal line through it, we got a y value that has two x's. Therefore, this is not one-to-one, it's not invertible, or at least not on its whole domain. Here, it is one-to-one, because it only goes through one point. If you do that with every single point, yeah. Again, so y. If we look at the one on the right, we see that that goes through 2 points for the y, and it could be x or negative x. Let's just say they're the same value. I don't know what they are, who cares? And then there's a y. So if you were to actually, if you were to actually put that into a function machine of some sort, let's just put y in, and then let's put it into the inverse. You can get two things. You can get x or negative x. So that's a problem. Versus if you did it here, there's no problem whatsoever. So let's look at the actual process to find this out. So you switch x and y and solve for y. And the resulting y is your inverse function. Well, why does it work? Because remember, an inverse is just a reverse operation. Here, what we're doing is we're literally reversing everything. And therefore, we get the thing that results from reversing things. So kind of think about that if you switch x and y and solve for y. Think about how it reverses everything. And that's how you get your inverse. All right, let's try this here. So if we just switch x and y, we will get x equals 3y squared minus 1. So literally just x and y, they're reversing. Here's what we get. And now let's just solve for y. So we get the 1 on the other side. We get 3y squared. And then we can, let's see, divide by 3. And we get y squared left. For simplicity's sake, we're not going to do plus or minus square root too much, but like technically it is. So here, I'm just going to write that there, but if you were to get like one specific function, you can just not. Anyway, let's try another one. This one is a little bit more interesting. So what we can do is multiply y minus 1 to both sides. By the way, this is what you're really doing when you cross multiply. And then we just distribute that x to the y minus 1. We get xy minus y equals y, because the y minus 1 divided out on the right-hand side. All right, so what can we do? Let's get all the y's on one side. And then that's 0. So let's actually take x to the other side. So we have only y's on one side, because we want to solve for y, right? So once we have this, we can factor out the y. And then how do we get y alone? Just divide that thing out. We get x over x minus 1. Hey, that's interesting. That's the same as the original function. Will this always happen? No. But it can. So in this case, f of x is the same as f inverse of x. So it sometimes happens. Sometimes you'll get an inverse function that is exactly the same as the original function. Sometimes you won't. How will you know? Well, you just do it, and then you'll see if you get it or not.
ご覧いただきありがとうございました。楽しんでいただければいいねしてコメントをして購読してください。次のビデオに会いましょう。